What's up, guys? We're going to talk about flipping land and whether or not you should be using a limited liability company or an S-Corp. So we're going to delve into the taxes and asset protection when it comes to land flipping in this video. All right, let's get started. Okay, so here's the thing. When it comes to land right now, I know the properties have gone up in price. And so where does the concern come in with flipping? A lot of times it has to do with the fact that you're building value into a lot of land flips in this current market because you're performing entitlement work. That is, you're creating value for a developer to do their ground up construction on the property. So you're building that value in. And in some instances, that can be quite significant. So when we're looking at flipping land, what I want to focus in on is protecting it. So if somebody goes out on the property and they hurt themselves, that I haven't put all that land at risk and now I potentially lose it, like what happened with a client of ours that was dealing with a lot in a development. I mean, get this, they have a lot and they're going to develop it. Kids go out there in a couple of quads and wreck on his lot. And then they turn around and sue him because he didn't have a no trespassing sign on there. That's the type of BS that you could be facing when you own raw land. And so we have to make sure we're protecting ourselves from those types of claims. Second thing we want to look at is taxation. And that is, how is that income from these land flips actually going to show up on our tax return? So let me break it down this way. I'm first going to go through the taxation side of it. Then I'm going to delve into the asset protection side of how you want to set up your overall business structure for your land flips. Okay, so let me just go to the white screen here and look at what we're talking about. So with land flipping, we really have two different things that we're going to be focusing on. One, is it long-term or is it going to be short-term? Now, how do I discern between the two? Well, with long-term land, what we're doing is, is this like the buy and hold stuff here? So you're going to buy it, you're holding it, you're not going to do any entitlement work on the property itself to increase its value for a developer to come in. You're just holding on to it and waiting for the market to go up. So if you buy land and you tend to hold it long-term, in this example, for more than a year, then I would tell you that any entity that you set up for this type of structure, typically it's going to be a limited liability company. I would set it up with an LLC, and I would treat it as a partnership or a disregarded entity for federal tax purposes. So all the benefits of flipping the property, those long-term capital gains rates are going to flow right down to me when I turn around and sell. Now, if I'm not holding it long-term, that is, I'm selling it, I will sell that property within less than a year. Or if I'm buying the land and I'm doing a bunch of entitlement work with the intent to sell it, then the issue is you could possibly be considered a dealer. And I don't want to be considered a dealer as an individual because there's a lot of negative tax ramifications that can come from being a dealer, especially when I flip the property possibly to a developer and it's not a cash out play. Maybe I'm selling them the property and it's on an installment sale on that deal. And so in that case, I don't want to be taxed individually on all of that money, because if you're a dealer, then you're not eligible for installment sale treatment, which means that if you sold land to a developer, let's say you had $200,000 in profit in this deal, when you sold that land, if you're doing it and he's going to pay you out over 5 years or as the properties get developed, you're going to pay tax on day one on that entire $200,000, even though you didn't receive it. That is a problem. And so for those types of deals, if it's short term, what I'm going to be looking at doing here with the short term deals, it's either going to be an S-Corp for federal tax purposes or a C corporation for federal tax purposes. Now, you've heard me talk about S-Corps or flow-through entities, and C Corps are standalone. That is, they're taxed at a flat 21%. So which one should you consider if you're dealing with your land and you're flipping it and you're doing the entitlement work from a tax perspective? Well, this is where it can go either way. I just got off the phone with someone. We were talking about his land flipping, and he has a lot of other things going on where he has S corporations for his other business ventures. And I made the recommendation that we create a C corporation for his deal. So in his land flipping, we're going to create a C corp, and he would just flip out of the C corporation. Everything would be taxed at a flat 21%. Now, the reason why I made this recommendation in his case is because I didn't want to see the expenses, the income of this entity right here showing up on his 1040, because he works with a lot of lenders. And the problem is that when you're working with these lenders, if they know you have this other business, because it's set up as a flow through, then they're going to ask you for information, tax returns, P&L, balance sheet. It just complicates getting loans. So our decision was, hey, let's keep my loan packet or my loan applications a little shorter, a little easier for me. I'm willing to set this up as a C-Corp, and then I could just keep rolling the profit. So it made sense for him. If you're not into that situation, then possibly an S-Corporation is going to be a better scenario for you, because both the C and the S will avoid dealer status. So you can flip all day long. You don't have to be concerned about being a dealer in real estate by setting them up. But with the S-Corp, it all flows down to you. And depending on your tax bracket, it may be advantageous for that type to use that flow through tax status. One other thing you need to consider as well here when it comes to flipping in a C versus an S corporation, and that is with using the C corporation and not having that income flow down to you. So one other consideration with C versus S for your land flipping business, it goes back to what I talked about a little bit earlier about the installment sale treatment for dealers. So if you think you're going to be selling your land to developers and it's not going to be a full cash out play and they're going to pay you over time because you're selling it on an installment sale, as I stated, all of that income gets compressed down into the first year. So even though you don't receive the funds, as we were talking about, you still got to pay tax on them. So in that case, if it was an S-Corp and I sold a piece of property, I made $200,000 on it, but I only collected $50, I'm paying tax on the full $200. So if I'm in a 28, 30, 40, or 37% tax bracket, I would rather have that $200,000 taxed at a flat 21% than down at my individual bracket, which is higher than the C Corp. So for those of you that consider installment sales and how you structure your deals, take a look at C Corporation tax status. So you get that flat 21% on those deals because you're considered to be a dealer in the sale of land and you don't qualify. All right, so S Corp versus C Corp, that's from the tax standpoint. Now, how do we go about actually putting this together from a business structuring? What does that look like? Well, as you know, whenever I'd like to set up entities, what I'd want to do if it's land, I would actually buy my land through a Wyoming limited liability company. Now, this runs contrary to what I've told many of you who've watched my videos when it comes to owning real estate. I'll tell you that that entity needs to be set up in the state where the property is located. But guess what, guys? This entity isn't conducting business in a particular state because it's owning raw land. It's not collecting rents or anything. So it's not technically doing business. So it doesn't need to register there. Set it up in Wyoming so you have complete anonymity. Now, with this Wyoming LLC, you then have to determine, hey, is it going to be doing entitlement work and then selling it, or am I just holding it, okay, in that particular jurisdiction? Because that's going to determine how we want this entity held. If all you're doing is the long-term stuff, right, and you're not turning around and doing the entitlement work, then you can be the member in the LLC. So if I'm setting this up and I don't intend to do all that work, I'll just list myself as a member. And this will be taxed either as a partnership if I have another member involved, or it'll be a disregarded entity for federal tax purposes. Doesn't have to file a tax return. Long-term stuff goes that way. The shorter-term entitlement stuff, the flipping stuff, that would be different. I would still create the Wyoming LLC for anonymity purposes, but then I'm going to drop this thing down here, and I'm going to have my corporation down here, S or C, owning 100% of my Wyoming LLC. So this one would be disregarded right here. So it's going to be a disregarded entity that goes right down to my LLC or traditional Inc. that's going to be treated as an S or C Corp. So the question is, right, where do I set up this corporation? Gosh, great point. So typically this entity is going to be set up in the state in which you reside because you're going to be pulling a salary out of this entity. So in this case, if I resided in Oklahoma, I would make this an Oklahoma limited liability company. I'm down here. Maybe my spouse is on this entity as well. And it owns a Wyoming LLC that possibly owns property either in Oklahoma, maybe it owns it in Texas, it doesn't matter. Fact of the matter is that I'm just doing it through that Wyoming limited liability company because it gives me the anonymity. Because on title, the LLC is listed there. No one knows about my company. They know nothing about me because it serves as a blocker entity, of course, because it's Wyoming. Now, that's the general structure, but it's really not doing what we need it to do for us, which is the asset protection side. And so this is what I would impress upon you when you're setting up your land deals. If you're doing more than one deal at a time, all right, then you may want to have other additional entities involved. So let's assume that you were going to do 2 deals at the same time. Well, you may want to set it up where you have 2 LLCs. Separate the property out. You got another Wyoming LLC. So this one would have my Texas property. This one over here has my Oklahoma property inside of it. And both of them are owned by this company just like that. All right. So if anything happens with the Texas property, it's just this entity that takes the risk right here. So setting up this way, you're splitting everything out. Now, unlike flipping real estate or selling real estate, which I mean rental property or residential real estate, where I would tell you this: hey, shut the entity down after you've sold the property. So any claims that come back against you, you've just killed them right there when you kill the entity. Well, in this case with land, you know what? You could probably reuse it. So if I was flipping land or I was holding on to raw land for long-term investing, I would continue to use the same entity for at least 5, 6, 7 deals. And then I might consider shutting it down and setting up a new one, because there's a very small chance that there's going to be any liability that comes from these types of deals from owning that property. So unless you just, there's some disclosures you didn't provide the buyer, or you made representations that were patently false, which you shouldn't be listening to me anyways, and that's why you're using entities, because I'm not here to help you do that, then I wouldn't worry about this so much. And I would continue to use that same entity, unlike if I was flipping residential real estate or I was just selling long-term holds that I had in my portfolio. Okay, so the problem though with this overall structure, or the one weakness in what I've just shown you here, is let's assume that I bought this land in Oklahoma. I spent $125,000 on it, but I've been working diligently to build up the value, doing some entitlement work on this property. So I've invested another $100,000. I'm into this thing for $225,000. And if anything were to go wrong on that property, then I am out that $225,000, because that's all equity right there that someone could go after. So when you're putting your land deals together, if you want to make sure you're protecting your entity, this is where you may want to bring in a lending arm to your overall business. That is, create another blue box over here. This is where you put your cash. All right, so this is a Wyoming LLC, and what it's going to do is it's going to hold all my investable cash. So I'm going to keep that there inside of this entity, and then when I structure one of my land deals, and I'm going to close in this LLC up here, the way I'm going to structure is I'm going to loan money to this entity and take back a first deed of trust. Now, you probably are aware that most banks are unwilling to loan against raw land, or if they do loan against it, the amount of money you can borrow is, 50%? It's not 80 or 90% against the land's value. But in this case, you could loan 100% against that land value, because you're your own bank. You know it's your deal. So if I loan 100% against this property here, I loan it $125,000 to buy the land. And then as I do the entitlement work, I loan it another $100,000. So when I say loan the money, here's what you should do. Create a line of credit agreement. So I would set up a structure that looks like this. I've got my land flipping business here. All right, so this is my LLC that's treated as a corporation, S or C. And then I would have my LLC up here that holds my property. And this is why I said keep the entity there for a while. You don't need to keep shutting these things down. Here's my second one up here. Let's see, because I'm doing 2 deals. And then I would have a lending entity over here. So this is my lending LLC. And what the lending LLC is going to do is going to enter into a line of credit agreement with this Wyoming LLC that holds my Texas property. And it's going to enter a second line of credit agreement over here with my Wyoming LLC that holds my Oklahoma property. So I have 2 lines of credit. This lending LLC agrees to loan me the money to purchase the land and do the entitlement work. So I'll have all that spelled out. And I'll say up to, you know what that number is. Let's say if I knew it was going to take me $225,000 to put this deal together. You know what I agree to loan you up to? $500,000. So I will agree to loan up to $500,000 so then I can secure the property with a $500,000 first deed of trust. I mean, that just takes any potential creditor. They look at that, they see you're fully underwater. They're not interested then in going after that property. It's a great way to attorney be gone your real estate. So when you're doing these active land deals, you may want to consider having this lending entity over here on the side. Now, if you're watching this saying, well, Clint, I don't fall on the active side. I'm more back on that buy and hold longer term strategy where you said just create an LLC in Wyoming to put that land in. Can this structure work for that? Absolutely. You could use this one to do your long-term deals as well. So in this case, if I was buying land, let's say that land cost was $80K, loan this entity here will loan this entity here $80,000 to buy the property. And then I take a first deed of trust back against the property. So if you're buying multiple pieces of property in this one LLC, it's an easy way to protect your investment. By the next piece of property you purchase, you need to borrow $100,000. So there's $100,000 that goes into this thing. You secure it against the real estate. In fact, what I would do here is structure this the same way. I would do a line of credit from this entity to this entity where I agree to loan up to $500,000, $1 million. And then each time I buy a piece of property, I will continue to encumber it for $1 million first deed of trust in favor of this entity. Just again, to make sure if you got some crazy kids out there running around on four-wheelers, or you got some hunters that are trespassing on your property, and he falls on his own gun and it goes off and he injures himself, they don't turn around and say, oh, look at all the equity in that property. We're going to go after that guy. This is how you do it. This is the people that flip land that understand this stuff that I've been working with. This is how we structure their affairs to make sure they got the protection they're looking for, and we've got the tax side cover if we know exactly what you intend to do with it. Long-term versus short-term, entitlements versus no entitlements on the flips. Guys, I hope you like this video. I'm breaking it down for you on land because it can get complicated. There's a lot of moving parts there when it comes to flipping land, knowing what you want to do with it, what your exit strategy is. The problem that most people have when they're working with professionals is they don't ask the right questions. Working with Anderson, we know the questions to ask. If you'd like to get a free strategy session, click on the link below. It's in the show notes, completely free. 30-minute strategy session will answer your questions, show you how to set up a structure like this, and you'll leave that strategy session in a better position than when you started. Guys, take care, and I wish you the very best with your investing.